We're joined now by our good friend Clint Lamb that covers the Alabama Crimson Tide over at Cover Crimson. You can follow him on Twitter at Clint R. Lamb. Good morning, good sir. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing this morning, Blake?
Good. I'm finally glad to get you into the show. I'm glad to sit down and talk to you, man. I love all the stuff that you do. I was watching a lot of your content over the last couple of weeks. It's been fantastic, and I wanted to get you on here because obviously, look, you had a massive win against Georgia. Okay, that quite honestly, I thought was one of the best games that we had seen the last couple of years. You're going through a new regime change, obviously, with one of the greatest coaches, if not the greatest coach of all time, now with Kalen DeBoer, and then a little slip up against Vanderbilt. I like open-ending these questions for someone who like you that covers the team. Can you take us in and the listeners in through the last 2 weeks and what you've seen around the program and what's your overall thoughts of what's happened these last 2 weeks?
I think the biggest thing is just it's a transition, right? And so you're seeing some of the highs and lows of that. It's a really talented team. It's a really talented coaching staff, to be honest with you. I think top to bottom, it's one of the better coaching staffs they've had in the last several years. But it's a new way of things being handled. Obviously it's vastly different than what you saw under Nick Saban. And I think you're seeing some of the growing pains in that transition. Like you see the highs that first half against Georgia. I don't think you'll find a team playing better football. But then, second half against Georgia and the entire game against Vanderbilt, that what really was not the standard in which, at one time Nick Saban had built, and then now what Kalen DeBoer is trying to maintain. So it's been very up and down. I think this week people have responded well. You would hope that they would, based off of what happened against Vanderbilt, and give Vanderbilt a lot of credit, man. I mean, they had a phenomenal game plan. They probably should have beaten Missouri. Obviously, the loss to Georgia State's a huge kind of black eye on their season so far. But I think a lot of that was the fact that you had 2 top 10 opponents coming up after that, and they just probably didn't take Georgia State seriously in the same way that Alabama probably didn't take Vanderbilt seriously enough. But this is a good football team. But you've seen the ups and downs. But I think things are hopefully trending in the right direction.
Clint, correct me if you think that I'm wrong here, but this is just perception from someone that's not in it every day like you around that team. UCF in the fourth quarter, then the first half against Georgia, you went on a 56-0 run, right? I mean, look, on our national show, I said this, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic because you're on here. It was arguably one of the best offensive and defensive performances through a fourth quarter and half, 3 quarters of football. Then you turn around in the last 6 quarters, things have gone a little bit haywire, a little bit defensively. I know that, at least I think that Brooks, but our good friend Brooks Austin put out some schematical stuff and film breakdown. When you saw that, like, I want to just get your overall thoughts. Like, are there just is it execution from what you've seen more, or is it scheme more? Like, how do you see, like, because look, man, 56-0 run is insane. I don't care if you're Alabama or if you're the Harlem Globetrotters. Like, that's completely insane. But then the last 6 quarters have been a little bit rough. I guess from what you've seen, from some of the stuff that's been out there, how do you break that down?
I think some people are not going to like my answer, whether it be Bama fans or it be fans of other teams, because, what I've seen, and we even got confirmation from Kane Womack, I think it was maybe after the USF game or maybe after the Wisconsin game, where they kind of admitted that they had more going into the week that they had planned to use that they didn't because the game script didn't really require it. You look back to that USF game, and as much as the offense was struggling, the defense actually was holding up pretty well. Granted, Byron Brown was doing some good things, but overall, from a points given up perspective, they were in pretty good shape. So, and then you know that they had been holding back a little bit. And then in that first half against Georgia, it's like they completely unleash. Great game plan going in, executing on both sides of the football. You get up 28-0, and then you go into halftime up 30-7. You come out in the second half, and I will say, just as far as giving Carson Beck, whether it be pre-snap, you're giving him one look, and then you're giving him a different look post-snap, a lot of that type of stuff they just really stopped doing. And it almost felt like they wanted to stop doing it because they felt very confident about their ability to win that football game. They were in complete control, and you would think, okay, if the offense just continues to do a little bit of what it was doing in the first half, even though Georgia might, close the gap a little bit, we should be completely fine. I don't
Right.
think the coaching staff was anticipating it falling apart quite like it did. And then it's like, okay, you're blowing this. And then that pressure starts to mount and then things get away from you real quick. Now, give them credit. When they needed the play at the end of the game, they needed to turn it back on offensively. All it took was one play. And that has a lot to do with a 17-year-old true freshman receiver. But it just threw 4.5 out of the 5 games, 4.5 of them. It's really felt like they've been very confident in their ability to win going into that half or that game. And so they've been, I wouldn't call it vanilla, but they haven't been as aggressive. The creativity hasn't been as much. And I think that that's a terrible way to go about it, to be honest with you. That's something that Nick Saban, it didn't matter if you were going against, he was playing Tua Tagovailoa against the Citadel, and everybody was freaking out the week before the LSU game back in 2019, saying, hey, you need to rest him up. But Nick Saban took every opponent seriously. And if it was LSU week that week and Tua would have been able to play, it doesn't matter if it's Citadel. You're playing him because you're sending the message to your team, hey, Citadel's not LSU, so we don't have to worry about, them. We don't have to give them our best.
Right.
Completely different mentality. But I think that that's something that maybe Kalen DeBoer and this coaching staff had to learn the hard way. A loss to Vanderbilt, one of the most embarrassing losses in school history. That makes you encouraged because that's something that can get easily fixed. But you got to treat every opponent in the SEC like it's Georgia. The bottom line, and I just don't think you've been seeing that enough up to this point. We'll find out this weekend against South Carolina if they can right that ship.
I'm getting to South Carolina next, but to your point, I lived what you exactly are saying that year that Ed Orgeron and LSU lost to Troy, right? I mean, then they turn right around and they beat the SEC East champions. I mean, listen, I am not trying to excuse what Kalen DeBoer and like what Bama did last week. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not that dude. However, I'm not going to completely I still think they're a playoff team. I mean, I'm not.
I agree with you.
I get it. I understand it. Now, if you continue to show those things, Clint,
Right.
all right, then that's one thing. But at the same time, I'm not going to completely overreact because, look, I've seen this before. I lived it. And then this guy, people on audio, I'm sorry, but this guy then comes, and so I'm like, listen, I understand it. I understand the keys that he was given, meaning Kalen DeBoer. He also had 30 people that transferred. Culture is going to get shaken regardless of who it is when you have that much influx that's coming in and out. Clint Lamb is our guest. Clint, let's move to South Carolina. Look, I've said this about South Carolina. We've talked about them for 4 weeks now because they've kind of been in some high-profile games, whether it be LSU or Kentucky, or now going into Ole Miss and Alabama here. Clint, when you look at South Carolina versus Bama, how do you see this one shaking out?
I think it's another, on paper, it looks pretty good for Alabama. Now, South Carolina can give you some trouble defensively. Yes. I mean, they get after you. They got a dual threat quarterback who can cause you some problems, really strain you. Rocket Sanders is doing some good things as far as being a complementary piece at running back. So it's not like they can't give Alabama trouble. They absolutely can. But once again, I think the matchups, what was interesting is against Vanderbilt, and Brooks was the one that pointed this out, but it was something from previous film study. I was, particularly the Wisconsin and Georgia game, when Alabama would be playing 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, they would be using kind of a 3-4 look. That's just what a lot of teams do. Depending on the offensive formation, they give you different personnel groupings. What you didn't see against Vanderbilt is they pretty much exclusively ran out of a 4-2-5. Didn't matter if it was 12 personnel. Didn't matter if it was 30 with 3 running backs, 0 tight ends, 31, 3 tight ends, 1 running back. It was pretty much outside of, I think, 1 play. It was exclusively a 4-2-5 look, and they were bringing defensive backs up into the box to kind of play a linebacker role. Sometimes they were moving guys up and even having them play kind of as an outside linebacker. But to me, that's where a lot of you didn't see that against Georgia. You didn't see it against Wisconsin. I think they were very confident in their ability to go in that game against Vanderbilt and come out with a win without having to do a whole lot. And they were very, very wrong on that front, obviously, at this point. But when you look at South Carolina and moving forward, you can't be basic in this league. Right. Teams are going to be able to exploit that. A lot of the cover 1 stuff that Alabama's been running, they run some cover 3 off of it. You have to throw in more variety. You have to throw in different looks. And you saw different. I mean, they were, like I said, they were giving Carson Beck a completely different picture pre-snap compared to post-snap in that first half. I think you need to continue to do that sort of thing or get back to doing that sort of thing. I think you need to control the line of scrimmage. Alabama's capable. but they just weren't playing very confident football. It was just kind of an off day for the entire team, both sides of the football. Even though the offense scored a lot of points in a very limited amount of minutes, their ability to or inability to establish a run game, a traditional run game with their two running backs, who I think are two of the better in the country. To me, that's a big problem as far as being able to control tempo and pacing of a game. And I think in this type of game, you got to get back to that a little bit. Use Jalen Milroe's legs a lot more than you did against Vanderbilt. Have your two running backs involved and then play your passing game off of that. If you can do that and throw a lot of different looks at South Carolina, I think you can win and potentially win pretty big. But at this point, I mean, I assumed last week they were going to handle business and they didn't do it. So until they prove me wrong the other direction, I'm going to go in a little bit reluctant to think they can run away from anybody right now. But if they get things right and they correct some of those issues, I do think they can handle a team like South Carolina.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, look, South Carolina offensively, they're 121st in third down efficiency rate. I mean, they can't throw the football. I mean, there's so many different things that's very inefficient with them offensively. But if you let Lenore Sellers get a crease, he's going to go. And I think that, like, if you're not fundamentally sound, then you're right. They can give you troubles. You brought up the running game that I thought was interesting. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but Jam Miller had 8.5 yards per carry last week, and I felt like that the time of possession got away last week. I mean, 42 minutes of time of possession for Vandy is absolutely insane. I mean, has that been a concern for you? Like, hey, score, defense back out there. Is that a level of concern? And then two, I guess, to add on to that, like, if I'm a Bama fan, I want to see Jam Miller and Justice get the football. Like, I'm not trying to be that guy that's old school, even though I kind of am sometimes. Run the ball, but I mean, it kind of goes into a little bit of a correlation. Look, man, if you let people in this league hold on to the football, you're going to be in trouble. Is that something that you've looked into or maybe that could be a concern here so far this season?
Yeah, it's a huge concern for me. And a lot of Alabama fans, they like point to that Vanderbilt game, and they're like, I mean, 35 points in less than 18 minutes of time of possession. I mean, that's incredible. How can you be complaining about that? And it's like, I don't think you fully understand. It was your inability to help out your defense. They were going out there and giving up 18 play drives. You couldn't give them any time of a break. It was either a 3-and-out or it was a 2-minute score. Pretty much that was your two options. So the defense was right back out there. And so you're not putting them in a position where they can kind of really collect themselves, maybe hit the reset button a little bit. And they were completely wore out by the end of that game. I mean, there's no way if I was Kalen DeBoer, I was kicking that, deep. I was onside kicking it because I did not, as soon as they could kick the football, I'll put it this way, immediately texted my co-host and I'm like, let's go ahead and get this post game, live started. And he's like, now? And I'm like, trust me, brother, this is over. And that's not like I'm normally not a pessimist like that, but you could just tell Vanderbilt had all the answers, but Alabama needs to be able to control games more. And that means through their offense. And you have not seen that nearly enough. In fact, you've barely seen it. I mean, out of, I think, 70 collective carries in 5 games for Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, 28 of them came against South Florida. Otherwise, you're looking at, that's not quite half, but it's getting pretty close to being half in one game. Otherwise, they're averaging, I think, just in the double digits, like 10 or 11 collectively per game, which is about 5 apiece on average. And to me, that's just when you've got two of the better running backs in the country. Jam Miller's done some really good things.
Yeah.
Justice Haynes has really not been able to get things going to the degree that I think a lot of us thought that he would. But he's certainly a talented guy, and he's continuing to remain in the starting lineup and getting work in the passing game. And, that's all great, but you've got to get his legs going. I mean, he's a talented back. You got an offensive line that I think's really come together as far as pass protection.
No
but
doubt.
as far as the run blocking, they haven't really been that you would have thought going into the year. Kalen DeBoer's style of offense lends itself more to the pass pro. But with what Alabama still had, they're going to have to recruit different guys. They still had those mauling type of guys in their, within their offensive line room. And so you've got to be able to establish the run and then play your passing game off of that a little bit more. I'm not saying that that's the only way you can play offense. You can certainly score points in a variety of ways. I just look at offense a little bit differently. It's more than just scoring points. It's how much can you actually control the game.
That you answered the question perfectly. I mean, I'm right there with you. I 100% believe that with you, and I'm right there with you. Look, I feel like I've come out here for 15 straight minutes and talk negative stuff and just ask questions, but it feels like, because I don't want to be that Blake's calling me again. He wants me to come on here and talk. I'm not trying to do that.
Hey, I get it.
But what is the biggest strength so far? Like I'm just going to ask, like, if you look at this team and say, look, man, like we're one of the best here. What is it for Bama in your opinion?
I think Jalen Milroe's progression. I think that has been absolutely huge. Like you saw flashes of it last year, but there were still so many limitations as far as what he could do for you from just being able to understand what the defense is doing when they're bringing pressure, understanding his hot reads, being able to work the seams a little bit better this year. I mean, I think he's shown vast improvement in that area. The fact that he can manage that short to intermediate parts of the field to where, a lot of teams last year, it's like, okay, and it's difficult to do both of these two things, but if the goal going in is try to limit his legs, keep him in the pocket, and throw two deep safeties to where you can take away the vertical passing game. Because if you can force the short to intermediate stuff, you can really put him in some tough situations. This year, he's able to exploit a lot of that. So Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan have done a phenomenal job as far as his development. He is now, in my opinion, everything that fit last year, finishing sixth in the Heisman. I think he certainly should have been in that conversation, but I still don't know, like, was he a Heisman finalist caliber player this year? I 1,000% believe that he is. He's protecting the football a little bit better, even though you did see the fluky pop-up interception against Vanderbilt, the pick six, and the fumble, which I put that more on Elijah Pritchett. He is doing a better job in those bigger games of protecting the football. And I think that's really going to matter down the stretch. So one thing you can do, if you're an Alabama fan, you got to have quality quarterback play if you want to go the distance. And Alabama 100% has that. They have all the complementary pieces that they need, whether it be offensively or defensively. You've just got to get everybody on the same page and moving in the right direction.
Going into South Carolina, I think that this is, speaking of co-host, my co-host Joe said that in his humble opinion that it was a get right week for a lot of teams around the country. What's your prediction of this game? I picked Bama to win. I'm going to be honest with you. I picked them to cover because, listen, there are a couple of places in college football that, like, listen, shit's going to get bad for you. And I'm like, because of the inability for South Carolina to move the football from the second half of LSU on, I just can't. I think that they're going to get things fixed. That's me. But I ask you your prediction of this game going into it with South Carolina.
Yeah, as far as like the revenge factor side of things, I'm really trying to be, a little bit reluctant to take that approach. Right. Why? Because I really thought after the dramatic way in which Georgia lost the week before this past weekend, I thought Auburn was going to catch a beat down on Saturday. And granted, the score ended up being somewhat lopsided, but you didn't see Georgia come out, completely fired up, dominate that game. I mean, even Kirby Smart was having to criticize their fans after the game for not showing enough emotion. So, and that's a rivalry game. That's supposed to be a big deal. So it's like you sometimes think you got a good feel for how a team's going to come out and kind of hit somebody in the mouth to get that, revenge or get back on track or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. So I'm really trying to keep it just to like the X's and O's. And I do think on paper, Alabama has a lot of advantages. Like you said, the fact that they can, but a lot of people are going to look at that Vanderbilt game. And while Vanderbilt didn't have a ton of success, like you would think running the football, I mean, I think after the first drive, their running backs averaged 2.8 yards per carry. I think Pavia and what he did, he was kind of in that same, 2.8, 2.9, something like that. So they really didn't have a ton as far as production on the ground. I just think Tim Beck did a really good job of picking his spots, and they got the yardage when they needed to from that group, and they were able to control clock. It's a matter of, does South Carolina have the ability when they're put in those situations like Vanderbilt where it's third and medium, it's third and long? Do they have the ability to exploit some of that, pick up first downs, extend drives, and really get Alabama's defense playing on its heels? I haven't seen that up to this point. They have the complementary run game. Like if they can get that aspect of it going and control things that way, they can shorten the game and really prevent Alabama from ever really running away with it. I just think that based off of last week, you'll see an emphasis on the run game, and they're going to make South Carolina throw the football. And if they're able to do that, then you could get an interesting game. I just haven't seen anything to this point that makes me confident that they're going to be able to do that.
If there is one thing that I was glad on the loss for Bama, was the Diego Pavia postgame show. You gotta admit that interview was pretty funny, dude. I mean,
amazing.
I mean, he went full the wire shit, and I'm like, oh my! And he did it on national television. He's praising God, then cursing. I'm like, all right, this guy's a whole vibe. To your point, Pavia greater than sign sellers. So I think that there comes a little part here where I'm like, look, man, this kid went into Auburn last year and also won. I get it's Auburn. I get all that. He didn't have those weapons either. So, look, it is what it is. Clint, last question for you here, man. You look around college football, specifically in the SEC. Is it 2007? I mean, look, you've got 3 number 1 teams that might go down this week. You know, if Ohio State goes out to Oregon and loses, the last time that the number 1 team has lost 3 straight weeks was 2007. Maybe I'm, wishful thinking, or just like, because I love chaos and I think it's great for our business. But when you look around college football, or specifically in our league, what have you seen?
Well, this is what I'll say. I think the fact that everybody's got an extra mulligan now with a 12-team playoff, I don't think that's a coincidence. Like last week, all the just chaos you saw from top 10 teams and stuff, like Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, and they can still make an SEC championship. They can still make the playoffs. They can still win a national championship. When have we ever been able to say that? Even in the 4-team playoff, it's like, even if that's the one loss you have, I mean, you might still be able to get in. I mean, if you win the SEC, I mean, even I guess last year, it really would have mattered. But if you start getting into like a 2-loss situation, there's no way you can really justify a loss to Vanderbilt. That's going to be what keeps you out. But now that you have that extra mulligan, I think teams in a lot of ways, you're wanting to not maybe reveal, get by in some of these games is making teams more vulnerable. And, I fully would expect, chaos to continue. I don't know that Ohio State's going to lose to Oregon necessarily. I mean, but I also wouldn't be shocked by it. So at this point, it's a different feel for college football. It's more of the NFL. It's not the NFL, but if you're a Falcons fan, and I guess if you watch them lose enough, you really start to feel those losses. But any given Sunday, if there's a loss, you're disappointed, but it's not crippling like it's been in college football. It's starting to become that a little bit more in college football, where you can absorb some of those losses and it doesn't feel as impactful. But I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. But it's a different feel with the game now than it even was last year.
It's very interesting. I think you bring up a very valid point there. Sometimes when you don't have that sense of urgency, it can come back and bite you. Clint Lamb, buddy, I know everybody knows where to catch all your stuff. Just in case that they don't, tell everybody where they can catch all the things that you guys are doing.
Yeah, we got covercrimson.com. That's where it's kind of a message board community. I'm doing a lot of my written stuff over there now. We have the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Go check that out if you want some of the Bama content. And then also at Clint R. Lamb on Twitter. I like having fun, trolling a little bit. It's kind of my whole little stick thing on Twitter. But you can go find me over there as well.
Well, at least you're not talking about LSU's recruiting class being bad. I mean, I don't know if that's your level of trolling, but I'm not going to go around making fun of Bama for recruiting. That's just me. But Clint Lamb, thank you so much, man. We'll talk soon.